Everyone is logged in.
Fabulous. All right. Well, welcome. Lovely to see you again. And thank you for all your questions and comments throughout the month. It's always great to hear what's on your mind. And good evening to my co-host and Chief Education Officer, Craig Bulmer, who will brief you on using the icons and how to type in any questions that come up for you while I'm speaking. And also, there are lots of poll questions tonight for you to answer. So have your fingers ready. Over to you, Craig. Thank you, Craig. And you can start the slides whenever you're ready. So tonight's overview, we will be covering gluten, good or bad, dairy, good or bad, grains, to soak or not to soak. Is coconut oil a good option for making granola? Should people with an underactive thyroid avoid soy? And fluoride in drinking water and toothpaste, good or bad? Now, with that last question, I've been wondering about that myself, and so far I don't have a clear answer. So I will do some more digging and get back to you about fluoride next month. So I'll answer the coconut oil question first because it is the quickest. The question was, I use coconut oil to make my own granola. Is there a better alternative? As far as I'm concerned, coconut oil is absolutely fine. And in my personal opinion, it gives a lovely flavor. You could use olive oil, but it will taste different. Olive oil can have quite a strong flavor. So if you're going to use olive oil for something like granola, use a light non-virgin olive oil. Light in reference to oil means light in flavor, not light in calories. And because the oven temperature used to make granola is low, there's little risk of burning the oil or exceeding its smoking point. So that was the coconut oil and granola question. Now, the next question was, is it necessary to soak grains? Let's do a poll to find out. Do you soak grains, oats, barley, quinoa before cooking or consuming? So we'll have the poll question and go ahead and answer. And Craig will give us the answers when you've submitted them. Okay, yes, no, equal amounts sometimes, and not sure if I should or I shouldn't. Okay, interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, I recommend soaking grains and beans in water overnight for the following reason. They contain a chemical called phytic acid, and you'll see that on the next slide. In fact, all seeds, nuts, legumes, beans, and whole grains contain phytic acid, but grains and beans tend to have the highest concentration of the phytic acid. Having said that, phytic acid content varies greatly among plants depending on climate, soil quality, and other environmental conditions. So even the one grain can have vastly different amounts of phytic acid depending on how and where it's grown. So what is the problem with phytic acid? It reduces the absorption of minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium. So if you eat a lot of grains and you don't soak them, you risk mineral deficiencies, and hence phytic acid has been called an anti-nutrient. However, and there's always two sides to something, phytic acid also binds heavy metals and therefore helps us eliminate them from our body, which is a good thing. So it's not about removing all phytic acid from our diet, it's about balance. Always think Goldilocks was a guru, not too much, not too little. And apart from soaking in water, you can reduce phytic acid content of foods in various ways. Firstly, simply cooking the food will reduce the phytic acid to some degree. You can also soak it in vinegar or buttermilk in the case of your grains, if you're having something like porridge. Fermenting, like organic acids, like especially lactic acid, produced during fermentation promote phytate breakdown, hence sourdough's healthy reputation. Pickling something will reduce the phytic acid. Sprouting also causes the degradation of the phytic acid, and hence the premium you pay for bread made from sprouted grains. And that's why sprouted sourdough is like, wow, because you've done everything you possibly can to remove the phytic acid. I have read some studies that suggest vitamins, if you have some vitamin C in the meal, that can also reduce the phytic acid, and you can combine the whole lot. You can soak, sprout, and ferment, and that will reduce the phytic acid of something like quinoa seeds by 98%. So the short answer is, yes, I recommend soaking grains. It depends, some just for an hour or two. The easiest thing is if I'm going to cook porridge the next morning, I will soak it in water overnight, ready to go in the morning. And I was also asked a related question, and the question was, this is not me, this is the person, I enjoy eating macro whole foods 5-grain porridge, but I don't like cooking it. I only like eating it raw with milk and have wondered if that has any effect on how good or otherwise it is for me. So now you can make your own conclusion based on what I've said about the phytic acid. For those who aren't familiar with it, that particular 5-grain porridge is a mixture of rolled oats, triticale, barley, rye, and brown rice. So all high fiber whole grains, nothing wrong with the ingredients. However, it would increase the nutritional value if you soaked or cooked, because not only would the soaking and cooking reduce the phytic acid, it would also be more satiating. That is, it makes you feel fuller sooner and keeps you fuller longer. But it would also increase your water intake and decrease the risk of constipation, because sometimes dry grains, even though grains are reputed to help you be more regular, if you eat them dry with not enough water, it could have the reverse effect. So it sounds like that person that asked the question, though, doesn't enjoy cooking the grains. So, because it does change the texture quite dramatically. So if you're not going to cook it, I just wouldn't eat it every day. Make sure you drink plenty of water as well. Okay, so now we get on to the big question. Gluten, which comes from the Latin word meaning to stick. And let's start with another poll question. Is gluten harmful? Poll number 2. Okay, so some people say yes, everyone should avoid gluten. More people think no, only people with celiac disease. And the most common answer was gluten is not harmful for everyone, but it causes more problems than just celiac disease. And I'm in agreement with the third option, the majority. Now I will tell you why, because it is not a short story, it is a long story, and it's really worth exploring because there is so much misinformation about gluten. But before I answer that question, I'm going to ask a second poll question. Does that mean gluten-free products are healthier than their gluten-containing counterparts? Let's see what you think about that. Okay. Oh, very interesting. I agree with the majority once again. No, they are not healthier. That doesn't mean they're necessarily less healthy, but it certainly does. Gluten-free products are not healthier just because they're gluten-free. They might be healthier, they might not be healthier, because gluten-free junk food is still gluten-free junk food. And later we'll explore, say, some of the ingredients in some gluten-free breads. In fact, why don't we have a look at that slide now, Craig? Let's show us. This is just one brand of gluten-free bread. And this reads quite similar to any old run-of-the-mill supermarket bread. So I've highlighted the problems here. Gluten-free bread still can have sugar, vegetable oil, and molasses, which is yet another type of sugar. The vegetable gums, look, the jury's not out. They are gums, you know, the sap produced from plants. Jury's actually not even out whether humans should be eating that. Preservative, sorbic acid, you know, neither here nor there. But the point I'm trying to make here is the black ingredients are fine, but so the soy flour is fine, but sugar, vegetable oil, molasses, I don't want that in my bread. So if you are going to go gluten-free, be just as vigilant in reading all the ingredients as when you're going normal bread. And you don't want those 3 ingredients in any of your bread. Thank you. And vegetable oil also means sometimes it's canola oil, sometimes it's sunflower oil. You don't want any of those oils in your bread because they make it increase the inflammation in your body. Okay, so let's dig down and find out why. Why is this the case? And what is gluten? Gluten, firstly, is not one entity. It's a mixture of 2 proteins found in cereal grains like wheat, rye, and barley. And just for completeness, the 2 proteins are called prolamins and glutalins. And I'm telling you that in case you hear those words. And just to complicate things further, these 2 proteins go by different names depending on the grain in which they occur. So just like sugar goes by many different names, so does gluten. But I'll just use the word gluten, and you just need to know that it refers to 2 proteins. And these 2 proteins give dough its elastic, chewy texture and allow bread to rise during baking. However, gluten is also found in many products you wouldn't necessarily associate with gluten. And I think this is one of the reasons why we seem to have an increased problem with gluten. It's just getting too common in too many things, a lot of which we don't even expect to contain gluten. Firstly, wheat gluten is often the basis for imitation meats. You know how you can get, mock duck or mock chicken. They use the gluten as a vegetarian source of protein, because when you cook the gluten in broth, it absorbs not only the liquid, but it'll absorb whatever flavor you've added to the liquid. So if you add, chicken broth, if you add, whatever flavoring, beef stock, the product, which ends up being sort of chewy and quite firm when you bite it, creates a very effective imitation meat. So just be aware, if you're eating imitation meat, you might be eating gluten, and a lot of it. Gluten is also frequently found in soy sauce and to a lesser extent other sauces. And if it doesn't say gluten-free soy sauce, then you can just assume that it has gluten. That also means gluten could be lurking in frozen meals that contain sauces or even foods that have natural flavorings. Beer contains gluten because brewer's yeast has gluten. But if you hunt, you will find gluten-free beers on the market, and they will be labeled as such. Gluten is even sometimes used as a stabilizing agent in ice creams. Cheese and dairy products do not naturally contain gluten. However, cheese that has undergone additional processing, like shredded cheese or some cheese spreads, may contain gluten. And then you have gluten in cosmetics, hair products, skin creams, even some toothpastes and mouthwashes might have gluten. Even some tablets and capsules might have gluten as a binding agent. So some of your vitamin, mineral supplements, even prescription drugs. So if you are seriously gluten sensitive or have celiac disease, you've got to explore all these things. And even splitting hairs, you might get some gluten on the back of a stamp or an envelope that you lick. So don't lick it with your tongue. So as you can see, it is really tricky to avoid gluten totally. So what's the problem with it? Is there even a problem with gluten, or has Novak Djokovic and other celebrities just made it up? Well, gluten really can cause serious health issues in some people. And there are 3 that you need to be aware of. The first one, and most of you have probably heard of it, is celiac disease. That affects about 1 in 100 people, although that number seems to be rising. The second thing some people suffer from is non-celiac gluten sensitivity, NCGS, or non-celiac gluten intolerance. And I'll dive into all these in a moment, but I just want to list the 3. And the third one is gluten ataxia, which is a neurological problem. So let's look at celiac disease first. This is a serious illness. And in people with celiac disease, gluten triggers an immune response that causes inflammation and damage to the lining of the small intestine. And that can then interfere with the absorption of nutrients and also cause a host of gastrointestinal symptoms. And it can lead to problems like, because of you're not absorbing all the minerals and vitamins that you need, it could lead to osteoporosis, infertility, nerve damage, even seizures, apart from just feeling unwell and having the abdominal symptoms. And if you have serious celiac disease, even a tiny amount, 50 milligrams, that would be the amount in one crouton, even that can cause trouble. So how do you diagnose it? Easy. Blood test and biopsy of the intestine. The blood test just looks for antibodies against a protein called tissue transglutaminase, and the biopsy will reveal damage to your small intestine. And the only treatment available to date is avoiding all consumption and contact with gluten, which, as we've said, given the ubiquity of gluten, it can be a challenge despite the availability of gluten-free products. So you have to check everything: cosmetics, creams, toothpastes, anything that you get into contact with. Now we've got the far more nebulous condition of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And that's what most people say when they go, I'm gluten intolerant, or I can't eat gluten. We don't know how many people have this. But what it does is you cannot deny subjective experience. If somebody doesn't feel well when they eat gluten, then don't eat gluten. And we're still trying to nut out exactly why this is happening. The symptoms are not usually as severe as celiac disease, but they can be similar. The good news is it does not cause intestinal damage. It just causes the symptoms. Red flags would be bloating, gas, diarrhea, fatigue, headaches, brain fog, even itchy skin. It is much, much harder to diagnose than celiac disease because there isn't a blood test and there isn't a specific marker. That is something that you will have to work out for yourself. If you stop gluten and you feel better, stop gluten. Simple as that. And then just for completeness, I want to mention the gluten ataxia. This is when people produce antibodies in response to gluten, just like somebody with celiac disease, but instead of damaging their intestine, it actually attacks. The antibodies attack a part of the brain called the cerebellum, which is responsible for balance, posture, and movement, even speech. So if you start to get funny symptoms, you lose your balance, coordination, you can't control your arms, you have difficulty writing or buttoning a shirt, that would give me red flags for investigating whether you have a condition called ataxia. There are other causes, not just gluten, but you want to rule out gluten. Okay. And finally, what are other diseases that have been associated with gluten? Books and books have been written about it. Grain brain, wheat belly, and they claim that everything from autism to ADHD, anxiety, chronic headaches, epilepsy, schizophrenia, depression, Parkinson's, dementia. I haven't found evidence to convince me that these problems are due to or exacerbated by gluten. Having said that, there is certainly no harm if you have one of these conditions, and if I had one of these conditions, I would stop gluten and just to see if it improved my condition, because there's still a lot of unknowns out there around gluten. So it keeps coming back to the fact that we are all unique and respond differently to different foods. Some people will go through their whole life and never have a problem with gluten, just like some people will smoke all their life and never get lung cancer, even though we know smoking is a cause of lung cancer. So the final thing hang on, I just saw a question. Shall I answer that or leave that for later? Do you rinse after soaking? Yes, I do. Sorry, I'll just quickly answer that question. I do quickly rinse up, but a lot of the water might have been absorbed in oats, so I'm not too religious about that. Yes, I know the soaked water is eaten, but it's just, I think it's the process of the water interacting with the phytate. If you have high inflammation in the body, would gluten-free help? I don't know. I have trawled through study after study, and there's no clear answer to that. In some people, gluten can be inflammatory. In some people, it is not. So it goes back to trial and error for yourself. And I will answer the low-fat milk question shortly. Okay. But I do want to just look at if gluten is a problem, why weren't people 50 years ago, apart from people with celiac disease, why suddenly have all these people got gluten problems where in the past it was just people with celiac disease? I can only speculate, and I've talked to colleagues about this. I think one reason might be too much of a good thing. Like there is too much gluten in too many things now. And I think eating too much of anything is a problem. You can even overdose on water. Marathon runners have been known to get a condition called hyponatremia from drinking too much water, and they've died from it. It's rare, but it has happened. Too much vitamin A can kill you. Too much iron can damage your organs. So maybe it's just a case of too much gluten in our lives. The second thing that might have happened is over the years, wheat growers have developed new types of wheat, and maybe these new types of wheat contain higher amounts of problematic types of gluten, because remember, it's a number of different proteins. And the third thing is that because everyone's in a rush these days, including bakers have reduced dough fermentation time, resulting in bread with a higher content of gluten than the gluten that was contained in bread of the past. So that could be another problem. So what should you do? What's my take-home message? if you think you might have a problem with gluten, if you have vague symptoms and nothing's helping, if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, why don't you start by keeping a food diary to see if you notice a pattern between what you eat and the symptoms you're getting, and particularly if things get worse when you eat gluten-containing products. And remember now, you probably didn't even realize that some of the sauces and frozen meals that you were using might have had gluten, or maybe the cosmetics you're using have gluten. So it is going to be quite a job to tease it all out. Here's probably my biggest take-home message. If you want to go gluten-free, see a doctor to get a blood test and intestinal biopsy before you go gluten-free. And that's because if you've been avoiding gluten for a while, it's very difficult to make a diagnosis. It's much harder to establish whether or not you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity or neither, because you won't be producing the transglutaminase antibodies, and your gut lining may have healed if you've not eaten gluten for a couple of months. So get tested while you're still on gluten. And I think just general advice for everybody, try not to eat gluten every day, even if you don't have any obvious problems with it, so that you don't develop problems in the future. Okay, so I'll just finish with what are some gluten-free grains? I can send you this in a list, but it's easy to remember. I've made up an acronym. Craig, you might want to type this up for people. BRAT, SCAM, BRAT, SQAM. So what does it stand for? Buckwheat. These are all gluten-free grains. Eat them to your heart's content in terms of you won't get any gluten from them. Buckwheat, rice, arrowroot, tapioca, sorghum, quinoa, amaranth, and millet. And that means anything made from those flours is gluten-free. And then you've got your specific gluten-free flours. The acronym I've made up for that is CHAT, 3 C's and then HAT. Corn flour, chickpea flour, coconut flour, hazelnut meal, almond meal, teff. They're all gluten-free. And then one last question I had was, do oats contain gluten? Because there's, you read one site and it tells you oats are gluten-free, and then you read another website and it tells you oats have gluten. Again, the answer is not clear-cut. Oats also contain a protein called avenin, and it's a gluten protein. However, that particular gluten protein is not the same as the gluten protein in wheat. And some people with celiac disease don't have a problem with avenin, so they can tolerate the oats. So oats have their own gluten protein, but it's different to the one in wheat, and that means some celiacs can tolerate it. So trial and error yet again. However, oats are often processed in the same facilities as wheat, rye, and barley, so they can be contaminated by gluten. And therefore, in Australia and New Zealand, oats are not allowed to be labelled gluten-free because they might be contaminated by gluten, even though they inherently don't have the same gluten. They are allowed to be labelled gluten-free in the US and Europe, but in Australia, gluten-free oats are labelled wheat-free to indicate that there's no measurable contamination with wheat, rye, or barley. So my final key messages about gluten are, firstly, a gluten-free label does not automatically mean that a food is healthy. Gluten-free junk food is still junk food. My other comment is humans love the idea of a villain, one scapegoat for all our health problems, be that gluten, dairy, sugar, fat, meat, soy, the list goes on. But that's just not how things work. Our health is dependent on so many different dietary and non-dietary factors, and it's the totality of what we eat and how we live that makes a difference. And when I answer the question about soy and thyroid, I will show you how it depends on the totality of your diet, not just the one ingredient. If I had to pick one villain, it would be the whole category of ultra-processed food, junk food, fast food, soft drinks, and most packaged and microwave meals. I go back to this over and over again. If we just eliminated processed foods, number one, we'd eliminate a hell of a lot of gluten anyway, and we'd eliminate all the other demons like sugar and vegetable oils. It's just people don't like the answer because it makes life, you've just got to be more prepared. You've got to cook more at home. You've got to spend more time preparing meals. And with the exception of someone with celiac disease, gluten sensitivity, or gluten ataxia, for the vast majority of people, removing junk food would improve their health a lot more than removing gluten. And if, as I said, if you remove junk, you're actually removing a lot of the gluten anyway. And don't forget that a lot of processed foods contain hidden gluten, including your soups, sauces, frozen meals, anything that's crumbed or battered, and most packaged desserts. And a final point, simply removing gluten from the diet has not been shown to lead to body fat reduction, because there's often still a lot of sugar and unhealthy fats in gluten-free products. And remember that if you have celiac disease, even a single crouton or communion wafer can cause problems. And an interesting point, if you have celiac disease, you are also at increased risk of other autoimmune disorders such as thyroiditis and inflamed thyroid, which could mean either an overactive or underactive thyroid. Okay, I'm going to pause for breath and ask you if there are any more questions about gluten, and I'll click on my chat and see if I've got any new questions. We don't see the slides changing, should we? No, I've only got a few slides today because I've just got a lot to say. Yeah, so the slides will change when necessary. So a question for you, just has that cleared things up for you about gluten? Can I just have a thumbs up? Has that done the job? I'm looking. Excellent. All right. Terrific. Then let's move on to our second big topic for the night, which is dairy. Let's start with another poll. Poll number 4, is eating or drinking dairy harmful to health? Let's see what the responses are there. Okay, so we've got nobody thinking everyone should avoid dairy. Excellent. This time I actually agree with the no. Only people with lactose intolerance or milk allergy need to avoid dairy products. Having said that, if you just don't like dairy or it just doesn't agree with you, don't eat it. The reason I answer no there is lactose intolerance is a real condition. Milk allergy is a real condition. I'll talk about them and explain why you should avoid dairy in those instances. But as for all the other things that dairy has been accused of, inflammation, headaches, mucus, heart disease, diabetes, the list goes on, I have trawled through literally hundreds and hundreds of research papers for my own education. It's not just about you. I want to know whether I should stop eating dairy because I want to have a healthy diet. And I just have not found evidence. Like they've actually measured people drinking dairy and do the inflammatory markers in their blood go up. They take biopsies of organs. There's just no evidence that milk does that for the majority of people. Now, I'm not saying that it might not for you specifically. People have idiosyncratic reactions to things. But as a general rule, I don't know why dairy has just been accused of so many things. And I'll unpack that in a moment. Before I do though, I'll ask another poll question. Okay, we've established that dairy is not a demon, even though it doesn't agree with everybody. But are dairy-free products healthier than their counterparts? Let's put that poll up. Okay, excellent. I agree with the majority once more that dairy-free products are not healthier than their counterparts. That doesn't mean they're always less healthy. All I'm saying is it's neither here nor there. It always boils down to reading the list of ingredients. There are healthy almond milks out there. There are unhealthy almond milks out there. There's healthy milk out there, and then you've got flavored milks that just have so much rubbish in them, you know, they might as well be sold as junk food. So let's start with, so thank you for your answers. Terrific. Let's start with answering the problem. What is the problem with dairy? You know, why has dairy-free taken on such a health status symbol? Like seriously, you know, I can just see people putting their, I'm dairy-free, like I've now committed to health. And there's just no basis for that. So why? Partly because of the bad press it receives from influencers that have a lot of power, you know, influencers and celebrities. Again, it's another scapegoat for chronic health problems. And I think it's because some people do have problems with dairy. There is, do you see what I mean? Because some people are lactose intolerant, it's just a little stretch to say, well, nobody should be eating it. If some people are, if it doesn't agree with some, maybe it doesn't agree with everybody. It's just that everybody else doesn't know that it doesn't agree with them. So that's kind of why it might have happened. The other reason dairy has had a bad rap is that it's a source of saturated fat, which for a long time was blamed for heart disease. And even though saturated fat has been exonerated, it's hard to shake off a bad reputation. And as I said, some people do have lactose intolerance or an allergy to milk, which are two different things, and I'll explain them shortly. So the specific accusations against dairy, which you will have heard, are that it contributes to obesity, inflammation, and mucus production. It increases the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and dementia, and that it even leaches calcium from our bones rather than strengthens our bones. And as I've said, I've trawled through the scientific literature and I simply have not found convincing evidence that that is the case. That is, if it is straight from the cow or goat or sheep or buffalo or camel. Yes, I have visited a camel farm here on the Gold Coast and I have made camel feta cheese, but that's another story. The long-winded point I'm making is that when it comes to unadulterated, just plain pastured milk with nothing added, it's not harmful to health as far as I have been able to find. Same with yogurt that has nothing added except the bacteria that ferment the milk. Yogurt is an excellent probiotic food. Same with cheese that has nothing added except the enzymes, which is usually rennet from the stomach of a cow that cause the milk proteins called casein to coagulate. Nothing wrong with cheese. And the same with butter, which is made from cream with or without salt. They can all have a place in a healthy diet. And it certainly doesn't make our bones weaker. There is strong evidence to the contrary that it is a good source of calcium. We do absorb it and it does strengthen our bones. If, however, at a future date, I find evidence to the contrary, if I find any evidence that dairy will increase your risk of dementia or diabetes or inflammation or anything, I will let you know. So for the time being, enjoy your dairy if you enjoy it. But, and there are three big buts. Firstly, you're always going to find people who disagree. That's fine. Secondly, not all dairy is equal. Far from it. And we'll explore that in a moment. And if you eat bucket loads of dairy, just like if you eat bucket loads of anything and exceed your daily energy needs, you will gain excess body fat. So let's go to the next poll question. Are low-fat dairy products, therefore, healthier than their full-fat counterparts? Again, I agree with the majority. That doesn't mean low-fat dairy products are less healthy. It just means they are not more healthy. It always boils down to the ingredients. Thank you again for all your answers. That some low-fat dairy products have added sugar, have added inulin, have added thickeners. I don't want them. But some low-fat dairy products simply have the fat taken out. And if you are really trying to control your weight and you really enjoy eating, if you prefer the taste of low-fat dairy products, drink low-fat dairy products. But follow these steps, the following steps that I'm about to give you, to determine whether the dairy product you picked up is healthy. My goal, as you can see, is always to teach you how to find your own answers. So here's the process. Firstly, go through the list of ingredients on the back of every dairy product you pick up. And we'll go through some of the ingredients in a moment. So you read the back and see the ingredients. And I think by now you know what to avoid. Sugar, vegetable oils, thickeners, emulsifiers, numbers, flavors, any additives. Dairy doesn't need any of these added things. Ignore any claims on the front of the packaging. The front is advertising, hence it's in big, bold print. The back is where they have to confess what is actually in the product. Hence, you need a magnifying glass to read it. And thirdly, don't make any assumptions about what is in a product, because even the same category of dairy, for example, feta cheese, dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of different types of feta cheese, and they can contain significantly different ingredients depending on the brand. So I'd like to just show you the ingredients now in Danish feta. Oops, vegetable oil. So unfortunately, I used to eat Danish feta because I didn't know. I love the smooth, creamy, mild texture and taste of Danish feta, but I ain't eating it anymore because it's got vegetable oil. Damn. The other stuff is fine. The salt is fine. The mineral salt is fine. It has to have an enzyme, and because that's what makes cheese, and cultures just mean your healthy bacteria. So it's a probiotic food. Unfortunately, the vegetable oil is not a good thing. However, you go ahead and I've looked at a lot of other the Greek feta. It's just got starter culture, the milk, the starter culture, and the rennet, and maybe salt. So again, not all feta cheeses are equal. All your cheeses, just read the ingredients. Another one to look out for is cottage cheese. Cottage cheese often has vegetable gums, preservatives, additives. So just read the ingredients. Okay. So let's just ask another poll question. What unhealthy ingredients might be lurking in your dairy products? The answer is all of the above. So your dairy products, depending on the product, could contain sugar or vegetable oils or emulsifiers. And there I have given you examples. So the sugar you would find in flavored milk, ice cream, cheese, and yogurt, of course. There are a lot of yogurts with a lot of sugar in them. Vegetable oils can be found in some cheeses. Emulsifiers can be found in yogurt or ice cream. Thickeners, again, yogurt or ice cream. Flavorings can be found in anything pretty much. Milk, cheese, yogurt, ice cream. Preservatives are often found in cheese, but I'm not too fussed about the preservatives because sometimes that's just necessary. Vegetable gums, acidity regulators, I'm not too fussed about that either. Numbers, well, who knows what that is. So basically you could find any of that stuff in your dairy products. So, and the ones that we're worried about are the sugar, vegetables, emulsifiers, thickeners, and flavorings. Avoid them and just eat the straight dairy. Let's go to the next poll question, which is also related, because I also asked you to look at non-dairy milks and yogurts and cheeses. Did you also find many of these ingredients in your non-dairy milks and cheeses? Yes, fantastic. I agree with all of you. Yes. So can you see the answer is sort of monotonously always the same? Always read the ingredients. Because it's not, that's what makes up its health value or not. And final question about cheese. Well, actually, no, there's two more questions about cheese, but I want to do one more poll because I've been asked about the fat in dairy. What is that a problem? Look, it's not a problem if you don't eat too much of it. It's just like anything. There's nothing wrong with the quality of the fat inherent in dairy. The problem is if they add vegetable oil. The problem is too much of anything. But just for your, just out of interest, let's work out which cheese has the highest fat content. So which of the following cheeses do you think has the highest fat content? Very interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, the answer is mascarpone has the highest fat content of all those cheeses. Now, before you remove the poll questions, I have rated those cheeses. I've deliberately listed them from the lowest fat content to the highest fat content. And just for your interest, cottage cheese has about 4 to 5% fat. Ricotta has about 8 to 10% fat. And then I'm not going to go through them all. They all gradually increase. Parmesan or pecorino can be 30 to 40% and mascarpone 40 to 45%. So as a general rule, with the exception of mascarpone, the softer the cheese, and this is why people think Camembert or Brie has the highest fat content. It's not the case. The softer the cheese, generally the lower the fat content. Who would have thought? And that's because of the nature of the fat. So there you go. There's your big tip for the night. Okay. So basically the message is, yes, cheese is a high fat food. So savor it, use it sparingly. And if you do eat cheese, you know, understand that it is a rich, enjoyable treat. Okay. Lactose intolerance. I just wanted to quickly go into it. Simply, it means that some people, as they age, they stop producing or produce much less of the enzyme called lactase, which is necessary to digest lactose, which is the sugar found in dairy products. So it's a real entity. It is more common in Asians and Africans and Indians because Europeans domesticated the cow and were eating dairy a lot earlier than were Asian populations. And so over the generations, Europeans tend to have adapted to eating dairy. What are the symptoms? But anyone can get it. I do know Europeans that have lactose intolerance. So it is a real entity. And the person who eats the dairy will get abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, flatulence, gas, nausea. People differ in how much lactose they can consume before they develop symptoms. The good news is there is no damage to your gut. You just feel uncomfortable because you're not digesting something, and that means your bacteria have to break it down for you, and that's what causes all the bloating and the gas. Obviously, the more lactose you eat or drink, the worse the symptoms, and the symptoms will start pretty quickly, like 30 minutes to 2 hours after consumption of the lactose. And usually if you eat the dairy with a whole lot of other foods, you're likely to get less problems than if you just say, drink the milk straight. That would cause you the biggest problems. It can be diagnosed officially. You can have what's known as a hydrogen or methane breath test, or you would test, not you, don't try this at home, your doctor can test the acidity in your stools. And if your stools are more acid than they should be, stools are not meant to be acid, but if they are acid, that could be a sign of lactose intolerance. So you can get it formally diagnosed if you need to. And again, the treatment is simply finding your threshold for your ability to, how much lactose you can tolerate. And yogurt is usually tolerated better than milk because with yogurt, because it's a fermented product, some of the lactose is broken down. So yogurt contains less lactose for you to break down than does milk. And finally, I was going to mention milk allergy. It's less common than lactose intolerance. And it's just like any other allergy. You are allergic to milk. So you could get anything from, you know, a rash, inflammation in your gut, or, you know, the usual pain, nausea, diarrhea. Okay, final question about milk. Let's put up the final poll. You've probably heard of A2 milk, A1 milk. What on earth does that mean? And is A2 milk healthier than A1 milk? I mean, you have to pay more for it. So obviously it's healthier, isn't it? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see what you think. Final poll question. And what's the verdict here? So it is healthier. It's not healthier. I don't know. From the research that I've looked at, I don't believe it is healthier. I think that there is no evidence that A1 milk is any worse or any better than A2 milk. So why? What's the story here? It's a quick story. A1 and A2 are two different proteins found in cow's milk. They're found in different proportions depending on the breed of cattle. And there have been claims that the A1 protein can cause a range of diseases from type 1 diabetes and heart disease to autism and schizophrenia. However, as I've said, there have been extensive investigations that have simply not substantiated. There's no evidence to back up that A1 is harmful. Again, if I find evidence to the contrary, I will let you know. So what started the idea that A1 was bad? Well, someone came up with a genetic test that could identify cattle that could produce A2 milk. So in the year 2000, a company was formed to commercialize the A2 protein in a brand of milk. And because of the genetic testing, it was more expensive to be able to label it A2. And so they had to convince the public that it was worth paying more. So they branded it as healthier. And maybe the person who started this movement had good intentions and honestly believed that A2 milk was better. But as I said, it's just not been backed up by subsequent research. So personally, I do not seek out A1 milk. Sorry, I do not seek out A2 milk. But if I find evidence to the contrary, I will. So in conclusion, there's no evidence to suggest that dairy consumption increases the risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, or any other health problems. But if you have milk, lactose intolerance or a milk allergy, or you just don't like it, avoid it. So what about the plant-based milks? Are they healthy? It just depends on the ingredients. And I think I've got, yes, I did. Can we look at the ingredients in some of them? So this is a good soy milk. There's a lot of soy milks that contain vegetable oils. There's a lot of soy milks that contain sugar, but you will find some that don't. This is an okay one. It's got filtered water. It's got organic soybeans. That's all fine. Tapioca starch, syrup. What's that? Sugar. So that's why I wouldn't buy this particular brand. That's why I haven't included what the brand is. Sea salt, nothing wrong with that. What's Job's Tears? It's a grain. It's a bit like millet, I think. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's got sugar in it. So if you're buying your soy milk, the two things to look out for, because there's nothing wrong with soy milk, as long as you haven't got added sunflower oil or canola oil or some other vegetable oil, and it is common, more common than you think, and as long as it doesn't have added sugar. What about almond milk? Next slide. Again, this okay, filtered water, nothing wrong with that. Organic activated almonds, fine. Organic rice syrup, damn, that's sugar. So again, I wouldn't get this brand because there are brands of almond milk without sugar. You don't need it. What about all the others? It's always the same story. We'll look at Nuttalex in a moment. It's always the same story. Just read the ingredients. But I'll tell you what, I did a bit of research. I found 13 non-dairy milks. I'll quickly run through them because I found it interesting. Soy, almond, cashew, coconut, macadamia, rice, oat, pea, peanut, flax, hemp, potato, and banana. Did anyone find any other types of non-dairy milk? Have I missed any? By all means, type it into the chat because I'll be very curious. Yes, they do taste terrible without any sweetener. So it's really about, remember, it's not about having, Nutty Bruce is fantastic. I totally agree. I do like, and they have, from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, Nutty Bruce does not have any harmful additives. They don't have vegetable oil, they don't have sugar, and they do taste good. So do try it. What about long life milk? It's simply been heat treated. I prefer fresh stuff, but I haven't found evidence that long life milk is a problem. Is that almond milk? Oh, almond, no, the Nutty Bruce I think has quite, it has soy, it has almond, it has quite a few different ones, doesn't it? There's been another question. If you had to choose low fat versus low carb, which would you choose? Me personally, low carb, because every carbohydrate you eat spikes your insulin, and high levels of insulin are your biggest risk factor for diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and a lot of inflammatory diseases. So if I had to choose one, definitely I would go low carb rather than low fat. It's also more satiating. What about the protein casein in dairy? Yes, there might be some people, some people may have an allergy to it, but it's rare. And yeah, it's not found to be harmful for the general. So I'm now working my way back through the chat questions. Are the studies related to processed or raw dairy? I have read there is big differences. Only processed, because legally they're not, most countries are not allowed to market unpasteurized dairy because of the health risks in terms of bacterial contamination. Sorry, I get distracted when I see a new question pop up. So you can get, I know that some people sort of sell it on the sly. I think it's called Cleopatra's milk, and they pretend sell it as a something that you bathe in, but people will still drink it. So yeah, all the studies are done on pasteurized milk. It's a legal issue. I'm just reading through quickly. What about acceptable level of blood mucus and contaminants in milk? That one's floored me. I don't know. That I really don't know. So I will look that one up. Scrolling down, there was a comment about coconut cream. Coconut cream, only one brand is better than coconut milk, which has additives and thickeners. Yes. Again, with coconut milk, you have to read and make sure it doesn't have all the additives and thickeners and emulsifiers. Okay, terrific. So just very quickly, really quickly to just sum up the non-plant-based milks. Generally, they're made up by grinding the nut, the legume or the other plant, soaking it in water, and hopefully not adding anything else except maybe calcium or vitamin D or B12. That's fine. Or even iodine. I don't mind if they add the minerals, but I don't want them adding emulsifiers and stabilizers and thickeners and vegetable oils. And which plant-based milk is the best? That depends on what you personally want. I'm going to tell you my assessment. I think rice milk is a waste of time, just because it's high in carbs. It's high. The rice is glucose, so it is the highest sugar containing milk naturally, and it has the biggest carbon footprint. So that's why, even though I have tasted it, I think it tastes lovely, but I don't drink it for that reason. Oat milk is also high in carbs, but it's easy on the environment. Soy milk has the highest plant protein content, and therefore it's closest in nutritional value to cow milk. So if you want something that has similar nutritional value, probably the healthiest is soy, because it's got the most protein and it's got a similar sort of fat profile. But there's nothing wrong with almond, cashew, coconut, macadamia, as long as they don't add any rubbish to it. And finally, let's see. And if you're concerned about the calcium, just buy milks that are fortified with calcium. And let's have a little look at Nuttelex ingredients just to close. This is a non-dairy butter substitute, and my goodness, doesn't it look healthy? And my goodness, I haven't got one good thing to say about it. Not one good thing. Sorry, I've got to take my glasses off to read this. Ingredients: vegetable oils, big cross; emulsifiers, big cross; natural flavor. What on earth does that mean? Natural color. Ugh. Honestly, but look at this. All these ticks as though they're all positives. Well, I don't care that it's dairy and lactose free. I don't care that it's soy free. Can you see that even soy has been demonized? There's nothing sacred anymore. So, you know, the ones to look out for are the vegetables and the sugars. They're the main things to avoid. And I just want to answer this final question I was asked. It's really quick. Should you avoid soy if you have an underactive thyroid? I can do a deeper dive in soy next week, but if you have thyroid problems, as in an underactive thyroid, the reason people have concerns is because soy contains chemicals called goitrogens, and goitrogens are substances that disrupt the production of thyroid hormones by interfering with iodine uptake in the thyroid gland. So in theory, if you have an underactive thyroid and on top of that, you add a goitrogen, it could make the situation worse. However, studies have found if you have an adequate iodine intake, and there've been lots of studies, not just one, and also looking at the Japanese who eat a lot of soy, you'd think they all had underactive thyroids, because they also eat a lot of seaweed, they get a lot of iodine in their diet, that counteracts any potential negatives of soy on the thyroid. So if you like a bit of soy milk, you know, I wouldn't eat soy every day, particularly if I had a problem with my thyroid, underactive thyroid, but certainly if you just like a splash of soy milk in your coffee or on your cereal, then even with an underactive thyroid, I wouldn't think it would cause a problem. But you monitor it with your doctor. It's far more important to avoid, if you've got an underactive thyroid, far more powerful goitrogens are cigarette smoking, the thiocyanate in it, certain medications like lithium, some anti-epilepsy drugs, and a heart medication called amiodarone. Those things are far more powerful goitrogens than is soy. Okay, it's been a big night, but I did get a lot of questions, and I thought they were really important topics to take a deep dive in, rather than just give you some, quick answer. The reason I deep dive is so that you can make your own conclusions. So, final poll, just so I know how you feel about this. Did it clear things up? Okay, do we have an answer? Yes, Ellen, fantastic. And some things when you say, I am thrilled. I'm really thrilled because, I think it is, they are tricky topics and there's so much misinformation out there. That is my goal, to empower you to make the right decisions for you. And ultimately, you are your best guide for your body, not me, not any other doctor. Thank you for another fun evening. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. And I look forward to seeing you next month. And the questions that I received that I haven't answered, I just didn't want to go on, the questions I've received for this month that I didn't answer, I will answer next month. All the best.